Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the second in my series of Play Petition. Play Pal. Oh my God, what have I said? I've got it all wrong. Play Petition chats with my Play Pals. It's a little bit of a tongue twister that we have there. I invented that off the top of my head last week, and it sounds really good. But if you're actually searching for this, you'll just see Ruth Lue-Quee, my mummy teacher, chats continuous provision and learning through play, which is what we're talking about. But there's a very, very important reason why I have started doing these videos for you over on YouTube. And that is all because of our petition that we have to make play-based learning statutory in Key Stage 1 and continuous provision, which is one of the methods by how we do our play-based learning within the classroom. Now, when we started this on the 3rd of July, we obviously had zero signatures. We went to 35,000 incredibly quickly. We are now at a whopping 94,000, just 3.5 months into the petition. But we are not stopping because this is a message that not only needs to be amplified for the duration of our petition, but for the duration of our campaign because we want to put our children back at the heart of education again. We care about children and we want children to have what is best for them. So if you're sat there and you're thinking, yeah, that sounds like me, I just want children to be happy, then please listen on to find out more. You can save this video, you can share this video with whoever you want. If somebody's saying like, well, yeah, it sounds great, but what's the reason why? That is what I'm going to delve into with all the guests that I have on here. And I'm super excited because tonight's guest is the one and only Dr. Will Zoppellini, who has been an absolute angel. I cannot tell you, I can't even think of a better word, angelic. Just a lifesaver when it comes to this petition because Will reached out to me back in the summer and I will let him introduce himself in a minute. But there is nothing this guy does not know when it comes to the research, the facts behind our mission to get children learning through play. His handle, if you want to go follow him, please do, is at Coffee and Theory. He has some amazing blogs on there as well, which delve into things a little bit deeper. But hi, Will. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm
This is
good,
great.
thank
Thanks for
you.
having me on here. This is really great. So yeah, my name is Will Zoppellini. Many years ago in a past life, I was a school teacher, and then I worked as a university lecturer and a researcher for a long time. And I started this Coffee and Theory because I wanted to try and bring educational research, educational theory more to the public so that there's some evidence for people to understand how children learn and the best ways that children can learn. And then, like you said, I found you online, found this petition and thought this is fantastic. I've always been an advocate for play-based learning. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's how every child in the world should learn. And yeah, I really wanted to help share the message in any way that I can. So and like you said, there's some blogs that I wrote about it on my website, Coffee and Theory. But I'm sure we're gonna get into a lot of it now.
Absolutely, we are. And I don't know what's happened, but my light has just decided to go out. So I'm now slightly darker than I was before, but it doesn't matter. Because what we're going to be talking about is definitely going to be all you need. So I thought it would be really good to get stuck into this insight or this belief, perhaps, that some people think that children are essentially a small version of us. They are a mini adult, and why that's not quite true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that phrase that children aren't mini adults. I think that even, I don't think a lot of people really understand that, but even some people that say they understand it maybe misinterpret that in that they think children just haven't had as many experiences or they don't know as much or they're just smaller in some way. But there's really the deep, profound differences in how the brain is made up. Physiologically, they're different. The even things like the heart and lungs and their energy systems, they're not just smaller versions. They're different and they go through these changes, developmental changes. through that kind of life course in early years, in kind of the middle childhood, and then in adolescence again. You have a lot of changes there. And I think that really these changes need to be appreciated. And so we can't just have, this is what we do for adults. Let's do it in a mini version in school or in other parts of their life. And yeah, I think it's definitely one of the most underappreciated um, things that we have in society, really, for understanding how children operate.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And like from a teacher perspective, it's one of the most frustrating things that I come across when I look at educational policy and how things are in schools at the moment, is that I often talk about this top-down approach. Now, we can talk about it in lots of different ways, but what I'm meaning explicitly here is essentially a lot of people in power or who are decision makers, their background is quite often within the secondary school sector. And the way that children in our secondary schools are taught, essentially like more adults, it's just been filtered down lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And so actually the pedagogy, that's like the way of teaching our youngest children who we need to learn through play. If you haven't signed the petition, go and sign it. They aren't getting that. They are getting the opposite. Our classrooms are incredibly formal. Yes, there are the odd one or two schools that are championing learning through play, but on the whole, it's not protected in our educational policy in England. And so these children are being taught like mini adults. Now, this is a conversation for another day because I'd argue how we teach our secondary school kids should be more playful too.
Sure. Yeah.
Because all adults like to learn through play, but we'll crack key stage one and then we'll move on to that. But that's how I see it as a teacher within the classroom. It's these policies that are placed down instead of looking at that. And you mentioned about sort of a child's brain's not developed properly. Could you explain like a little bit more about the science for
Yeah.
us?
Deep science in 2 minutes.
I love it.
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the biggest things that we're talking about here is for children how dopamine is released. And I think in things like social media, the term dopamine like comes around quite a lot, and people say, "Oh, is it good? Is it bad?" Really, it's the source of dopamine that you're getting. There's good sources and there's bad sources that you can become addicted to. And like in adults, we see that when you become addicted to gambling or something like this, and you need that reward. But dopamine essentially is this neurotransmitter that we have. It gives us signals for reward, motivation, pleasure, things like that. And play-based learning is a great source of dopamine, especially in school, because you have this joyful, meaningful experience. That joyfulness leaves kind of chemical traces in the brain. All of that helps rewire the brain through what's called neuroplasticity or brain plasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself and rewire itself. And essentially, as it's doing this, it means that children become intrinsically self-motivated to keep learning because they get that motivation like transmitted through this kind of neural pathway, neural network. And really, what that means for learning is that they learn more deeply and they stay engaged for longer because they enjoy what they're doing. And this affects other things, like it supports things like analogical reasoning, which is the brain's ability to see connections between things that like seem different. So, for example, you recognize shapes in other areas, like hexagons in like beehives or like triangles in like bridges and street signs and things like this. You start to make those connections. Um, I guess it's kind of the early signs of abstract thinking. And also it helps with being actively engaged also helps with executive functions. So things like working memory, controlling your inhibitions, focus, regulating your impulses, things like that. And so, this is a really complex connection that's happening in children's minds. But limiting that, the other side, limiting that, having them kind of sit there and be told through direct instruction means that all of those processes aren't happening. So it's not just are they becoming overstimulated through bad sources of dopamine, which play-based learning isn't, but it's also not having enough dopamine and not having these neural pathways start to like become connected. And that way is also quite bad. And as you know, people grow up, particularly into adolescence, if you're not getting enough dopamine, you can become, have really low energy, really low mood. It's early signs of things like depression and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think, maybe I've gone a bit too long with the deep science, but essentially that's, in a nutshell, the reasons why this is so important.
Yeah, I fully I mean on a basic level, like I'm here, I could like geek out to this all day. I'm like, tell me more, tell me more. But on a basic level, for me, I've always had like a really simple philosophy. Like children learn from teachers that they like. If they like you, if you're fun, if you're engaging, if you're motivating, if you're making everything playful and that engagement, like you mentioned, that will release those dopamines
Yeah,
in their brain, which will help them to learn more effectively.
absolutely. Yeah.
And to me, I don't understand why we would want an education system that blocks this as opposed to supports this. Why would we not want our children to be feeling these feelings of joy, of feeling included, engaged, feeling that intrinsic motivation to want to learn? And that sense of like I can do really well. I'm good at something because through play they can discover what it is they're good at and they can achieve things. And why would we not want that in? I mean, that's not a question for you because I know that you
I
want.
can't answer it.
But that is a question for anybody who A hasn't signed it. I know 94,000 of you have, but there is a lot more people that could sign it. And also, that is a question for the people in power, the Education Secretary, the members of Parliament. Why would you not want that? And I know that's a question that you've through a lot of the research that you've done and for years and years now, but we put together a very sort of mini research document that summarizes things in a really nice way to read for parents, for educators, for whatever you are listening to this. I'll put it in the show notes below so that you can access it and read it if you'd like to. But what is that research that's there that tells us this is crucial? And I know there's loads, but is there something in particular that sticks in your mind that is like, it is here in black and white. You can't deny this. Why are you not listening?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. If we were to sit here and reel it off, reading, writing, mathematical thinking, scientific thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, emotional intelligence, self-regulation, motor development, like skill acquisition, logic, building empathy, there's probably, or not probably, there is a research study that has done every single one of those things. Um, I think, maybe some points there's a really famous study in play which was done in Sweden and it was done in the 80s, but it's been redone since then a couple of times. The last time was, I think, 2018. And now the study is just called The Shop. But what they set up in this classroom was like a supermarket, done with parents bringing things from home. Everyone has a role. And not only did the children understand uh, things like literacy, reading, writing, those kind of things when they were making the signs and you having the transactions and all of those things, but they also started to understand concepts like marketing.
Mhm.
And this was done through guided play, where the teacher kind of prompted them with questions or maybe like introduced new materials or new resources and things like that. And one of the best things about this study was when it was originally done and when it was done again, it was an intervention, so it has a control group, and the control group learn the basics of reading and writing that you would expect in that time, but not at the same level as the kids that took part in the shop. And definitely not, like I said, some of these abstract things like understanding what marketing is and how that works and how to like relay that to, these customers. Basically, it's just other kids in class. And also that like the kind of understanding where the roles come into that. So, that's a really like I guess a classic study that really shows it. But if you just even think about some of the other things, even in like symbolic play, where children have to start to, ask themselves, how does my character feel? You know, what does my character think about this other person? Because you know that kids will get pretend upset and pretend annoyed when they're playing. And those kind of things really start to develop, things like empathy. And all of this would really also not completely solve, but help a lot of behavior issues that we see in schools as well, because it brings out those social emotional skills that children need to kind of interact with each other. Um, so I think that's probably a really good example of an intervention study that shows, it was there to increase um, the basic literacy skills, but it definitely went a step beyond that. So you can kind of see these extra advantages that you get from it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just reminded me of like a lesson that I always used to teach. And when we'd be learning money, and I'd have a mixed year one and two class. So that's the perfect age that we're talking about for the
Yeah,
petition.
yeah,
And we'd set up a shop. We would literally set up a shop and I'd give them all like little purses and they all went and made like their own labels for things within the shop. And then the dialogue that you'd have, the conversations that you'd hear the children trying to be like getting them to come to their shop to buy like their thing as a pet. All those like, that's what's the word? They're like, they're having to tout for business essentially, but all of those skills. And it was always like relevant to the child's ability. And actually, it also allowed, so, I'd have older children that were talking about pounds and to like two digital places. So they'd be doing like £1.63 and this one's
yeah, yeah,
£7.41. And then I'd have other children that perhaps were still working on really basic things like 5p and 1p within the same provision, within the same classroom, but they could all access it and they all learnt something from that, as opposed to me sitting there segregating them and giving them a worksheet, getting them to do it in isolation, no context, no real understanding of it, no way to apply it. When we're talking about sort of the brain science and those sorts of things, and we're talking about the links that children make to their previous learning, they're actually physical, they're active, they're engaged, they're doing it, they're going to make links to scenarios where they've perhaps been in the shops with their mum or dad, and it all and then it all ties in. Whereas if I'm just teaching you money on a worksheet, and then you go to the shop with your mum and dad, and you haven't been able to like play that scenario, it kind of can just stay on the worksheet. We
yeah,
don't transfer the
yeah,
learning. Whereas when we're giving because there's so many children like over the years that I've gone off topic a little bit here, but they'll have an intervention in an intervention room with a TA, small group of four, and they can do this thing. Let's say that thing, I don't know, is using adjectives in their writing. And then they'll come back into the classroom. You'll look at their writing and you're like, there's not a single adjective in here. And then the TA's going, well, they could do it last week on Tuesday when we did that intervention. Why haven't you done it here? And it's because that link hasn't been made explicit. That child, they haven't understood that actually what I've learned here, I can transfer back into the classroom or back into my learning everywhere. It's done in isolation. Whereas through play, it's not. That's the method of learning. It's constant, it's ongoing. And I truly believe, and there might be some factors for this or not, but it develops those links that you were talking about a lot more securely and
Yeah,
practically.
absolutely. And that, that fantastic practice that you're talking about is you see all of that mimicked in the science. The neurotransmitting processes help with attention and recall. And, when you say they make connections and they can bring that back, it's absolutely, completely grounded in science as well. Um, and the one thing also that it helps with is the problem solving, because essentially, like you just said, you've isolated a problem on a worksheet. Whereas when you're in play, you have to, almost like a drama, like you have to react. It's like an improv, what's happening when you come back. I'm sure, I mean, you have kids. If you've taken them on the train, or people that have kids gone on the train, I don't have kids, but I remember watching a kid on a train once, and he started walking up and down pretending to be a conductor and like asking for tickets, and I just think, um, if he came up to me, I would only do it jokingly, but said like, "Oh, I don't have a ticket." He's going to have that problem solving moment. How am I going to react? What does this mean? What does that? And kids do that with each other, and it's, if you're an adult and you can't see this connection, this is one of the things that I think we mean by this, that kids aren't mini adults. That is exactly the critical thinking and problem solving. It lays the foundation for it there. It opens them up to new ways of thinking. It lets them try and find creative solutions to things. And the other thing in all of this is that there's almost no failure and a lot of risk. Whereas when you put something on that sheet or you have it in isolation, there is failure and there's a problem with that. But if you're playing and you get something wrong, you just either find a way to solve it so that the play or the game can continue, or it doesn't mean anything. You're not affected by it. And that really, I think, lays a solid foundation for education, where children start to become less fearful of getting things wrong, and being able to risk in that way. And it's definitely a really strong avenue for us to do that. And that's definitely, I think, one of the biggest problems that we have with kids at the moment at any age, is that they're scared of failing and scared of getting things wrong. And yeah, like I just said, this is really a good way to kind of start to tackle that.
And I mean, I can relate to that. My little boy he's just turned 6. He's had spelling tests since he was in reception. And like he genuinely, like his teacher will have said, oh, he doesn't like, he doesn't like to get things wrong in the spelling test. I'm like, well, of course he doesn't. Like he doesn't want to fail. Like who wants to fail?
Right.
Equally, I mean, again, I'm going off track here, but what is that doing? Learning a set of words on a piece of paper. It's what we talk about actually, isn't it? That short term, essentially teaching to a test formalized learning strategy. He can get 10 out of 10 in his spellings. But actually, can he then apply that within his written work? No. 9 times out of 10, he can't.
Yeah.
Um, because developmentally, he's still phonetically spelling most things as well, anyway. But also, I can't really remember where I was going with this right now, but just it's pointless. Oh, and if he'd actually had more of a play-based way of learning and applying those words, so like a skillful environment where there was like perhaps keywords that I, as like a co-player, went in and used with him
Yeah.
that were relevant to what we were learning about, that he might then be like, oh, I'm going to write that word down because I'm really enthused about it. We could have been doing anything like, I don't know, a little science investigation or just whatever it is. He's gonna be like, I want to learn to spell that word. How do I spell that word? I then might show him how to spell it, and it's gonna soak in because it means something to him, and he
Yeah, for
wants
sure.
to learn it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and almost to kind of, again, like link it to the brain science we were talking about earlier. That intrinsic motivation, it comes from this kind of chemical reaction, and it's and not being afraid of the failure and kind of treating it head on. If you're playing a game, and whatever it is, if it's you as a co-player with him, or if it's in a class and there's, a group of children, whatever the play state of play or the situation that they're in, to engage in that, there's going to come a moment where they either need a skill or a piece of knowledge that they don't have or that's slightly off. And not having that is is completely not a threat in this situation. It's a motivation. It's all right, if I want to be involved in the game moving on, I have to go and know this. And sometimes, a teacher as a co-player, there's been research in how children treat the adults, treat them, sorry, not treat the adults, treat the teachers during play. And sometimes they just ask, sometimes they want to stay engaged and they'll go and ask, what's this? What's this piece of knowledge that I need? What's this question? And sometimes, depending on the teacher role, sometimes they'll answer it, or sometimes they'll prompt to, this is where you can go and find out, or this is how you can find out, or these are the resources that we have. And that's the motivation. They're going to go and find that knowledge, get that knowledge, or they're going to become better at a skill to make the game better, to make the play better. Um, and it's not something that can be done in drips. It's something that they're going and doing every single day, and it builds over time, builds that consistency. But that motivation is going to come, and it's going to make them love learning. It's going to make them love education a lot more, than we have at the moment.
And that's one of the things that I always think about as well. Like some people might be listening to this and they're like, well, when do you teach them then? How do they ever get taught? Why don't they just
Yeah.
play all day?
Yeah.
Um, any setting where there is continuous provision, where there is play-based learning, your children are taught. You could argue that they get better teaching because you have a small group for a short burst of time that's really going to captivate your children where they're at, meeting that specific group. If you think I've got a class of 31, but I can chunk it down into little groups and I can really target them, give them some really good teaching, then the rest of the time, then they are in provision, they are accessing the environment, they are playing, they might be doing some teacher-led tasks, that sort of thing as well, but they are also taught. We're not saying they just play and then they don't have any teacher input. They still have teacher input, but they spend the majority of their time in play. And that's just one thing to say if you're sat here thinking, oh, do they ever actually get taught? They do. And we still have whole class moments as well, because that is equally as important for things like community. And there's certain things that you do want to share with everybody. It's not just one thing, it's a playful classroom and it's a mix of things as opposed to a more formal direct instruction classroom, which isn't a mix of things and it's very teacher top heavy down, filling the children with knowledge essentially for those short-term gains. But what you mentioned as well about the engagement, the intrinsic motivation, and how crucial this is for children, I find it really funny that, you know, the government's ambitions at the moment, Labour, is really heavy on attendance. It's one of their big priorities. They want children in school. If children are in school, they're learning. This is the narrative that we are being fed. And obviously, we have the school fines. So, if your children aren't in school in England currently, if you miss so many days, whatever, you start to begin to get fines. And it's really quite messy. And personally, I don't like how we criminalise parents when actually a lot of these children that aren't, there's always obviously a minority, but for the majority of children, if they're not in school, there's a reason why. And that reason why generally lies with the school, whether they want to admit it or not, that that environment isn't the best place for that child to thrive. And so, if we had this engaging curriculum, if we had this engaging way of teaching, of bringing in our play-based learning, I think attendance would naturally increase because children would want to be there because they'd be having these dopamine hits, the good ones, because they'd feel that motivation, because they'd feel that sense of fun and happiness that we wouldn't be where we are currently, that we're fining parents because they can't get their children into school.
Yeah, I mean, just from the kids' point of view, absolutely. If there's an ongoing kind of role play scenario like the shop or a restaurant or something like that that they're engaging in every day, you don't have to be a parent to know that kids are going to want to be there all the time, and they're going to be upset if they're missing that, and they're going to love education more if they're there. So definitely, I think it's a big part of um, trying to increase fun and enjoyment with learning. Absolutely, and yeah, you're right. I it's something that. Learning is always happening there, and like you said, it's just maybe different to what people are used to. But it is a pedagogic approach, play-based learning, play-based pedagogy. You used the phrase co-player earlier, and I think that's one thing to understand, that teachers kind of stood at the front, the direct instruction goes away, and you look at um, more switching of roles as a teacher, and you're controlling the environment. You decide, what resources are in the room, what the kids have access to. Um, so if there's something you want to focus on, you can start to manipulate the environment and facilitate that play. And you kind of go between a mentor, a guide, a co-player, a teacher, between these things. Sometimes just joining in the play and prompting with questions it is going to help a lot. I think one thing, you know, I I don't know what it is. In maybe this is a society thing. I don't know, but there seems to be this idea like, okay, let's change to play. If the whole of the UK or England, sorry, change to play tomorrow, the first 10 weeks will be awful because people won't know what they're doing and they'll have to get used to it, and you have to be okay with failing. And at the moment, some of these changes that come in, they're to show short bumps in data. Let's get everyone in school with whatever, these fines, or let's another standardized test for reading, or let's, add something. And you get those data bumps. But at what cost are you getting these data bumps? You're getting, if you're adding a test in secondary school, you're disengaging children because it's more tests, it's more stress, it's more anxiety. it, you know, teachers have to get them to pass the test. That's it. I'm not, I'm going to die on the hill that teachers are the lifeblood of every country. Like, to me, a country is only ever as good as the teachers that are in it. Um, but if you put them in these pressure situations, they're going to try and get kids to pass these tests. So you've got teachers that don't like doing it. You've got kids that don't like doing it. Where does that, leave us, really? I'm not sure. And the play-based approach, it takes longer for things to be learned, but the learning is deeper and it's more transferable. Absolutely. And there's no question about that. From whether it's a philosophical point of view and you're looking at people like Piaget or Vygotsky, or whether it's actually proven in intervention studies around the world, that the evidence is there for it. But the other thing I always find really interesting about this is that there's like phrases that we have, you know, and one, I always try and point this out. One is people say, "Oh, are they going to grow up to be an Einstein? Are they going to grow up to be like Einstein? Or are you going to grow up, you know?" And I just don't, I never get this point because I always think to myself, Einstein, he didn't use flashcards, right? Like, he didn't sit there memorizing these facts. I mean, he played. I don't know another way to put it. He played. Like, when he was, he would have got that thinking when he was a kid, but even as an adult, like, he played. He played with these laws and math, and, you know, he sat there making things up and trying to figure out where that was going to be. And it's almost as if now in school we are having a system where we're saying, okay, to be a smart student, we're going to test earlier, we're going to get you ready for testing, and so you can pass these things and be able to, kind of sit still and listen and do these things so that you can be really smart. But if we asked anyone in society, okay, give us like a bunch of role models, to talk about, Einstein will probably come up, about, with people like him. They didn't do any of that. So, it's almost laughable. Like, you just think that, he never sat there like that. And so why do you think that doing this is gonna equate in any other way? It's yeah, I laugh at it a lot, but it's actually a serious point.
No, it's so true. And what you've said as well about people wanting thinking that if my child does it sooner, they will be better at it.
Mm,
Absolutely not the case. Just not the case at all. And this sort of links into the whole school readiness agenda as well. There's a whole heap of things we could go into that with like the change in the age that children actually start school. They're actually starting school earlier now. So therefore, when we compare school readiness, we're comparing children that are a lot younger now to how old they were. There's like a 17-month difference between the age at which children were starting school in like the 80s, the eldest one there, with like the youngest one in 2025, because of changes and stuff that has happened. But essentially, what you said there about, play-based learning, it may take longer, but they're going to learn it better. The problem is in society, we have this rush. Like,
mm.
we don't seem to care about whether you retain that learning, whether you can apply that learning into different contexts, whether that learning is actually sunken into your long-term memory. We seem to care. Can you do it as young as possible? Can you do it as quickly as possible? And can you pass this test? And that is what's wrong with education. And I also hate how it's always, we're getting them ready for year one, we're getting them ready for year two. Why aren't you just allowing these children to be year one, to be year two, to wallow in the play, the enjoyment, the fun, the curiosity, the discovery, the self-belief that you build up when you're allowed to be a 6-year-old child or you're allowed to be a 5-year-old child. We are just pushing them to being what we were talking about, mini adults,
Right,
before they are developmentally ready for it.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And with no evidence. And I don't know why it seems to bleed into almost every facet of a kid's life. Like, when you look at it, I don't really know where this kind of came from. It's not just in education. Like, we've briefly spoken about this before, but think even things like sport and where kids play, it's kids sport, people have this concept like that it's fun. It's doing the exact same thing that school is. Like, school's putting these exams on, and we're putting kids into leagues and wins and losses and things like that really young. You go watch kids that are like 6, 7 years old, and they're wearing those oversized bibs that they all fall over. Like, why are they wearing bibs? When I was a kid and I went to the park, which I don't know why a lot of more kids don't do now. But when we went to the park, no one had bibs, and we knew whose team we were on. Like, we rarely passed the wrong person ever, and we all wore different color tops. But like, they need bibs and the areas marked out, and I see them doing warm-ups. It's just a complete waste. And people watch this and they'll go, well, what do you mean, a warm-up's a complete waste? What are you talking about? But we kind of said this at the top of this discussion. Physiologically, kids are different, and you put them into that scenario and suddenly that has to happen. What do you think's going to happen when you walk out if you walk out the house with your kid and you go to the bus stop, right? I can almost guarantee that you've had this experience. Okay, let's say you're going towards a bus stop. Does your kid start running towards the bus stop without you?
Yeah.
Ever? Yeah, that's happened, right? So, and parents watching this, you'll have left the house and your kid will have started sprinting to the bus
Yeah.
stop full on. Okay, A&E is not full of kids with popped hamstrings who started running towards the bus stop, right? When they go out to break at school, The lunch assistant isn't standing there going, hold on, let's do some stretches so everyone doesn't pop a hamstring. But we put them in sport, and the first thing we're doing are these ridiculous stretches that their legs aren't even, it's pointless. They're holding their leg. The way that the tendons are, the ligaments, they don't even need stretching. But we put this on them, and it's the same thing we're doing in class. Like, what are we doing? We're saying, oh, you like you just said, this school readiness, like get ready to sit at a desk, get ready to do this. And it's not only goes against how they learn, but it's also against how they function. And I don't know how we got there at this point, but it seemed like in a I don't I don't know. It seems to be getting out of hand in some of it. That it's almost, it's you kind of alluded to just let them be kids. And I would say that in the next, period of time, it's going a step further than that, maybe. It's almost like like we're not letting them function how they are at that age. Um, and yeah, it's hopefully we can start to change.
That's it. That's our why. Like that is ultimately our why. When you know better, you do better. We know. We were both classroom teachers. We both understand the research, the theory, the science. There is nothing that prevents us from openly wanting to talk and share how we as a society, how our current education system is failing our children by not having a play-based approach. We have it in Wales, we have it in Scotland, and yet in England, we don't have it. We are falling behind the other countries within the UK and many countries around the world as well. Um, but I think it's really important to end this discussion on the fact that we need this for our children because we want them to be 5, 6, 7 year olds and to thrive how 5, 6, 7 year olds should. So if you watch this, I hope you feel the same. I hope you believe in children in childhood. I hope you're going to go put a signature on the petition to make play-based learning and continuous provision statutory in Key Stage 1. I hope you're going to read the research document that Will and I have put together. You can get that from the link below. And I hope that by the time we do another one of these, it won't be 94,000. It will be way more than that. And we will be on our way to doing more good to make more changes for our children. So thank you ever so much, Will, for joining me
Yeah, thanks for
this
talking. That's been
evening.
great.
Sorry that the light went off. I ended up doing it in the dark, but but there we are. And Will is at Coffee and Theory if you want to find him, and you'll find me at My Mummy Teacher. Thanks, guys. Go and sign, and let's do this.